April 1945. The war was drawing its last breath. Northern Germany, near a village half consumed by fire. The air carried the scent of damp ash and diesel fumes. Along the dirt road, 20 German women stood with hands raised, trembling, their gray auxiliary uniforms streaked with mud. Behind them, a convoy of British armored trucks came to a halt, engines humming before falling silent. Boots crunched on gravel. Then came the stillness, the kind that made every heartbeat sound unnaturally loud. One of the women whispered, "They'll shoot us. They have to." The others believed it too. They had been told for months that capture meant death, that Allied soldiers never spared female flak helpers or auxiliary personnel. "You served Hitler," their officers had said. "You'll die for him." Now, facing the black barrels of Lee Enfield rifles, it felt like a prophecy about to be fulfilled. But no shots rang out. The British soldiers simply stared, their faces weary beneath steel helmets, dust caked on their cheeks. A single command broke the silence. Asterisk. "Keep them there." Asterisk. The voice was flat, firm, belonging to a British major who emerged from the lead truck. He looked no older than 30, but his eyes carried the weight of too many things seen. He studied the line of captives, girls, not monsters. Some not much older than his own sister. In those final weeks of the war, over 500,000 German women had served in auxiliary roles: clerks, radio operators, nurses, anti-aircraft spotters. Many had been drafted into uniform in the Reich's desperate last year. A few had fired guns, most had not. But the fear was universal. Capture meant execution. The major's next order came quieter, almost hesitant. Asterisk. Lower weapons. Asterisk. The rifles dipped. Asterisk. Search them. Asterisk. Then, after a pause, as if the word embarrassed him, he added, asterisk. Feed them. Asterisk. The women didn't move. They didn't understand. Asterisk. Feed them, not shoot. Asterisk. A soldier opened a ration tin, the metallic click echoing louder than any gunshot. The smell of corned beef filled the air, and hunger struck harder than fear. One woman sobbed without a sound, her legs buckling beneath her. In that moment, the story the Reich had drilled into them, the myth of merciless enemies, began to fracture. None of them yet knew how deep that crack would go, or how overwhelming the shock would be when the next order came. The rifles remained lowered, the major's voice, official yet strangely subdued, cut through the drizzle once more. Asterisk. Get them food. Asterisk. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The British soldiers exchanged glances, as if questioning what they had heard. The women stared, disbelieving. A moment before, they had braced for a volley of bullets. Now, a corporal was using a bayonet to pry open a tin. Steam from field kettles curled into the damp air, carrying the scent of tea and grease. The women stood frozen in their lines as British soldiers scooped stew into chipped cups. No words were spoken. The only sounds were metal scraping against tin, rain tapping on canvas, and the quiet shock of survival. Corporal Jameson, a lanky young man from Leeds, muttered to his comrade, asterisk. Never thought I'd serve dinner to the enemy. Asterisk. His friend just shrugged. Asterisk. Orders are orders. Asterisk. Behind them, the major watched, arms folded, his expression unreadable. He knew morale was fragile. Mercy could be mistaken for weakness. But these prisoners weren't a threat. They were starved, filthy, hollow-eyed. British rations in 1945 averaged around 4,000 calories per day. Porridge, corned beef, bread, tea, and jam. Meanwhile, German frontline soldiers sometimes survived on less than 1,500, and civilians in the Reich were near starvation. When one of the women finally tasted the stew, her eyes welled up. It wasn't gratitude that moved her, it was confusion, disbelief. Decades later, a post-war diary would recall. Asterisk. They fed us better than our own officers ever did. We were enemies, yet for the first time, I wasn't afraid. As they ate, the rain softened the edges of everything. The mud, the tension, even our uniforms, now looking strangely similar in color. Asterisk. A British medic passed by, tossing a wool blanket over each woman's shoulders. One whispered asterisk. Dank. Asterisk. He nodded without meeting her eyes. Nearby, a stray dog wandered between the lines, and a soldier tossed it a biscuit. It wagged its tail, splashing mud onto boots. And for one fleeting second, laughter broke the silence. They were human again, but such moments couldn't last. At dawn, new trucks would arrive, bringing fresh guards and new orders that would remind everyone that kindness in war always has limits. By morning, the rain had hardened the earth into a crust of gray mud. The women awoke to the clatter of breakfast tins being set out. Hot tea, white bread, sugar, asterisk sugar. Asterisk most hadn't seen it in months. A few stared at the cubes as if they were jewels. One woman touched hers gently before dropping it into her mug, watching it vanish like the certainties they once held. The British soldiers moved through the camp with quiet efficiency. Some joked, some hummed, all exhausted but calm. They didn't shout, they didn't strike. They treated the women like people. And for the prisoners, that was the strangest cruelty of all. A kindness so unfamiliar, it ached. Across Europe, the numbers were staggering. In the final 3 months of the war, the Western Allies captured 17 million Axis personnel. Thousands were women radio operators, nurses, typists. They had worn uniforms, sworn oaths. Now, they sat on wooden crates, cradling tea mugs with shaking hands, their insignia stripped but their shame intact. Among them, a 20-year-old named Helga Kruger kept glancing at the guards' faces. Asterisk. They smile. Asterisk. She whispered to the girl beside her. Asterisk. Why do they smile? Asterisk. A nearby guard, polishing his rifle, overheard. Asterisk. Because it's over. Asterisk, he said, half to himself. She didn't understand. Asterisk. Over for whom? Asterisk. Later that day, as they were marched toward an old farm being converted into a holding site, a small gesture shattered the tension. A British private offered a piece of U.S. Army chocolate to the youngest prisoner. She hesitated, then took it. The guard shrugged. Asterisk. Go on, it's not poisoned. Asterisk. She laughed nervously, the first laughter the camp had heard. By evening, the women had blankets, tea, and space in a drafty barn. The guards lit a fire in an oil drum. Someone played a harmonica, a sound both foreign and familiar. For the first time since capture, the women spoke in hushed tones. Relief mixed with bewilderment, but peace was short-lived. At dawn, the rumble of new engines announced fresh trucks, fresh boots, and a new set of guards whose faces held no trace of warmth. Engines growled before sunrise. The women stirred, clutching their blankets as unfamiliar voices barked commands. The easy rhythm of the previous day vanished the moment the new guards stepped in. They wore crisp uniforms, sharp boots, and colder eyes, moving like men still braced for battle, not caregiving. One slammed his rifle butt against the ground. Asterisk. Everyone outside. Line up. Now. Asterisk. The camp yard filled with fog and tension. A clipboard officer stood by a jeep, flanked by translators. His tone was clipped, bureaucratic. Asterisk. You will be separated by role. Nurses here, typists here, flak auxiliaries there. Asterisk. The words times, flak auxiliaries times, sent a ripple of fear through the crowd. Those were the women who had manned anti-aircraft batteries, technically combatants, though most had only fetched shells or logged data. Still, it sounded like an accusation. Allied protocol stated that anyone who had directly aided the German war machine could be interrogated. That meant hundreds of young women now faced the label of potential war criminals. Around 22% of female auxiliaries had served as Flakhelferin and radar watchers and spotters for the Luftwaffe. Some had watched bombers fall, men burn. They remembered the cheers. Now, they stared at their boots. The officer's pencil tapped against his clipboard. Asterisk, name, unit, assignment. Asterisk. The line shuffled forward. A nurse whispered prayers under her breath. A typist, trembling, muttered, asterisk. I was never a soldier. Asterisk. The translator didn't respond. His pen simply moved. Behind the rows of tents, hammers echoed as British engineers raised new shelters. Their canvas marked times, interrogation section asterisk. The realization spread like a chill. Whatever mercy they had felt yesterday was about to be tested. A young guard, barely 20, avoided eye contact as he handed out numbered tags. When a woman's hand accidentally brushed his, he flinched not from disgust, but confusion. She noticed. That tiny human moment sharpened the fear. Later, as lines broke, whispers began. Asterisk. Why separate us? What happens in those tents? Asterisk. No one answered. But as lamps flickered to life that night, shadows moved behind the interrogation flaps. Pens scratched. Tea boiled. No screams were heard, because what came next would be interrogation, without violence, without mercy, and without warning. The first to enter the tent was a 19-year-old Luftwaffe typist named Martyr. She had imagined fists, shouts, a dark room with a single bulb. Instead, she found a wooden table, a kettle steaming on a small stove, and a British sergeant with kind eyes and a stack of papers. He gestured for her to sit. Asterisk. You typed reports. Asterisk, he said. The question landed like a grenade, polite, disarming, absurd. Outside, the camp buzzed with whispers. No one knew what happened inside those tents, only that no one returned bleeding. Fear turned into curiosity. From a distance, they saw silhouettes, guards leaning, translators writing, teacups lifted. It didn't look like punishment. It looked like conversation, and that was somehow more terrifying. Across Europe, Allied intelligence had learned that cooperation worked better than coercion. Nearly 80% of German records and troop positions were recovered through interviews, not beatings. The British called it times the soft method asterisk. Offer a cigarette, earn a story, show dignity, break denial. It worked. Martyr's voice trembled at first. She insisted she only typed, "No shooting, no killing." The sergeant nodded, scribbling notes. Asterisk. How many girls at your battery? Asterisk, asterisk. 20. Asterisk, asterisk. How many trained on the guns? Asterisk, asterisk. 4. But we all logged the raids. Asterisk, asterisk. And when the bombers fell? Asterisk. Mart hesitated. Asterisk. We cheered. Asterisk. The sergeant didn't react. He just wrote. The silence hurt worse than an accusation. After half an hour, he slid her a biscuit. Asterisk. You've done well. Go rest. Asterisk. She blinked, unsure if it was a trick. Outside, she passed the next girl entering. Asterisk. They don't shout. Asterisk, Mart whispered. Asterisk. They just listen. Asterisk. That night, the camp was quiet. No cries, no punishment. Only the scratch of pens and distant radio static. Some women felt their fear dissolve, replaced by something colder, exposure. Every word, every diary entry, every trivial secret now felt dangerous. One diary, recovered years later, held a single line. Asterisk. They broke us with silence. Asterisk. As darkness settled, the last interrogator stepped out of his tent, rubbing his temples. Lanterns glowed behind him like soft stars. From the mess tent, the faint hiss of a warming radio filled the air. Then, a tune flickered through the static. A trumpet, a rhythm, the unmistakable swing of Glenn Miller's Asterisk, in the mood. Asterisk, every German head in the camp turned. The song was electric, upbeat, almost forbidden. Under the Third Reich, this music had been banned for a decade, labeled degenerate, enemy noise. Many of these women had grown up being told that listening to it was treason. Now, the victors played it loud enough to echo through the barracks. Inside the mess tent, British soldiers laughed, tapping their boots, clinking cutlery. One sergeant grabbed another's arm and spun him in mock dance. Outside, the prisoners froze. The sound was a portal into another world, one that hadn't known ration cards or propaganda. A young woman whispered, Asterisk. We used to listen to this secretly. Asterisk, another added. Asterisk. They killed a boy in Hamburg for playing this on the street. Asterisk. Neither smiled. The song wasn't just music. It was a reminder of everything their country had destroyed. Freedom, laughter, even rhythm itself. As night deepened, more guards gathered, humming along. The brass swelled, the drums quickened. A guard leaned against a post, cigarette glowing in the dark, and noticed a prisoner sitting apart, tears streaking her soot-smeared cheeks. He hesitated, then walked over slowly. Asterisk. You all right? Asterisk, he asked quietly. She didn't answer, just shook her head. Asterisk. We weren't allowed to feel happy. Asterisk, she murmured. Asterisk. Not for years. Asterisk. He looked down, unsure what to say. Finally, he exhaled smoke into the cold. Asterisk. Then maybe start now. Asterisk. For a second, the moment hung in the air, absurd, fragile, real. The trumpet hit its final bright note, and silence washed over the camp. The guards returned to their posts. The prisoners returned to their thoughts. But the echo of that swing tune lingered, a ghost of a world before the war proof that joy itself had survived. For one young guard, that single tear he'd seen wouldn't let him sleep. Private Lewis barely slept. The swing tune still echoed in his head, but louder than that was the image of the crying woman outside the mess tent. By dawn, the camp was silent except for the soft clatter of tin mugs. Mist rolled over the fence like pale smoke. He saw her again, sitting alone on a crate, clutching a chipped enamel cup. Her uniform hung loose, her hands trembling from cold more than fear. He hesitated. Guards weren't supposed to speak much to prisoners, especially not these women. But something about her stillness pulled him. He walked over, crouched to her level, and held out a folded handkerchief. No words, just a small gesture, simple and human. She stared at it as if it were a weapon. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Their hands brushed a flash of warmth in the damp morning. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He nodded once, stood, and walked off before the others could notice. Behind him, she pressed the handkerchief to her face and wept soundlessly. Later, she wrote in a note smuggled to another prisoner, asterisk. He treated me like a person. I didn't know how to respond. Asterisk. The camp that week overflowed. More than 60% of prisoner of war sites in spring 1945 held triple their intended capacity. Space was tight. Food stretched thin. Yet the British still brought in medical units. Asterisk. Hygiene means control. Asterisk, they said. The next morning, white tents appeared near the fence, Red Cross symbols freshly painted on canvas. Lewis watched as medics unpacked supplies, soap, towels, undergarments. The prisoners lined up, uncertain again. After days of filth and fear, they were being told to bathe. Some thought it a trick. Others whispered, asterisk, they're checking who's sick. Asterisk, Lewis found himself stationed by the water barrels. He caught the same woman's eye as she stepped out, her hair clean, clinging to her cheeks, wearing a British-issued wool sweater instead of her uniform. She didn't speak, but she gave a faint, almost invisible nod. That night, the camp smelled different, less of sweat and diesel, more of soap and wood smoke. The guards said it felt civilized again, but for the prisoners, it was something else entirely, a rebirth that felt like both shame and salvation. The Red Cross tents glowed white against the gray morning, their canvas rippling in the wind. Orders came briskly. Asterisk, medical inspection, all prisoners. Asterisk. The women formed uneven lines, clutching blankets, unsure whether to fear or hope. The smell of disinfectant hit first, sharp, sterile, cutting through the musty air. Inside the first tent, medics worked methodically, speaking softly as they examined each woman. Soap bars were handed out like treasure, followed by rough towels and new undergarments stamped Times British Army Medical Stores asterisk. The women undressed behind hanging sheets, shivering from cold and humiliation. Some wept quietly, not from pain, but from the realization that their captors were giving them what their own army never had care. A medic scribbled notes. Asterisk lice, malnutrition, minor trench sores, asterisk. Another sprayed disinfectant down the seams of a coat. The hiss of the nozzle sounded eerily like a gas release. One woman flinched violently, covering her face. The medic froze, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Asterisk. Not that kind of spray, asterisk, he said. She didn't answer, but she stopped shaking. By afternoon, the transformation was visible. Laundry steamed over fire barrels. Wool uniforms hung limp in the breeze. British soldiers joked about the cleanest Germans in Europe, but privately, many were shaken by what they saw: young women who looked decades older, their bodies brittle from years of scarcity. As night fell, the camp smelled of carbolic soap and boiled cabbage. The women sat wrapped in clean blankets, steam rising from their mugs of broth. A few dared to hum tunes under their breath, nothing military, just fragments of lullabies remembered from childhood. A British sergeant, watching from the fence, muttered, asterisk, we're washing the war off them. Asterisk, his comrade replied. Asterisk, off ourselves too, maybe. Asterisk, the next morning, the wind carried a new scent roasted flour and tinned butter. The kitchens had doubled output. What came next wasn't just hygiene. It was abundance on a scale the prisoners couldn't yet comprehend. By midweek, the camp buzzed with motion trucks backing in, kitchens roaring, steam curling from giant pots. The women smelled it before they saw it. Meat, bread, coffee, not the burnt barley substitute they knew from home. Asterisk. Real coffee. Asterisk. A British quartermaster barked orders while soldiers unloaded crates, stamped Times. Product of Canada Times and Times. U.S. Army rations, asterisk. The women watched in stunned silence. Loaves of white bread stacked higher than helmets, cans of butter, corned beef, jam a mountain of plenty. Most hadn't seen a full meal in years. Now, the enemy was boiling stew in vats the size of bathtubs. To the German women, it wasn't funny. It was dizzying. They had been told the Allies were starving too, living off propaganda and greed. But this was proof that Germany had never stood a chance. The war had been lost long before the guns fell silent. It was lost in the factories, in the fields, in the endless convoys across the Atlantic. A week after their capture, paper arrived rough, yellowed, thin as onion skin. The British officer read the order aloud. Asterisk. Each prisoner may write one letter. 25 lines only. Asterisk. The women froze, then broke into whispers. Asterisk. Letters. Asterisk. After weeks of silence, a way to reach home or what was left of it. That evening, the barracks glowed with candlelight and sound, the soft scratching of pencils, muffled sobs as women recalled addresses that might no longer exist. Some wrote to families in Dresden or Königsberg, names that now meant ash and evacuation columns. One wrote asterisk, Mama, I'm alive. Please tell father. Asterisk. Another simply wrote, asterisk. I am sorry. Asterisk. The guards collected the letters in sacks, tied them with string, and handed them to the British postal unit. A few days later, the first replies came, or rather, didn't. Returned envelopes stamped Times, address unknown Times, or Times destroyed, in action asterisk. For some, even the ink of their hope came back unopened. By May 1945, over 5 million German civilians were displaced or missing. Whole neighborhoods erased, family records burned, postal routes gone. For many prisoners, the silence that followed was worse than hunger. The trucks arrived at the gate one morning, not with food this time, but with barrels of white paint and stacks of brushes. The major gathered the prisoners. His voice was cold, deliberate. Asterisk. You'll be painting today. Every wall, every symbol. Asterisk. The women looked at one another, unsure what sin they were about to erase. Rain fell steadily, turning the camp yard into a swamp of brown slush as they were handed brushes, buckets, and thick white paint. The officer's order was simple. Asterisk. Erase every symbol. Asterisk. No speeches, no lectures, just labor. Walls once marked with fading swastikas and eagles were now streaked with dripping white. Each stroke blurred the old world a little more. Some painted with quiet relief, others with tears mixing into the rain. To many, the emblem they were covering wasn't just a regime's mark. It was their youth, their identity, their sense of belonging. Watching it vanish felt like watching themselves dissolve. By noon, the camp reeked of wet paint and rot. A British sergeant walked past, checking work, saying little. A few guards looked uneasy. This wasn't punishment, but it felt like one. The women didn't complain. They just kept painting, their fingers raw and pale from the cold. At dusk, the walls gleamed white in the fading light. Blank and silent. The camp yard looked eerily clean, too clean, like an empty page waiting to be rewritten. The guards herded everyone inside, where benches faced a flickering screen. When the generator coughed to life, the projector's beam cut through cigarette smoke. The first frame appeared. Barbed wire, gaunt faces, striped uniforms. No introduction, no commentary. Just horror on celluloid. The women went still. No one breathed. No one spoke. And for the first time, they began to understand what they were truly erasing. The film showed Ravensbruck. The women in the footage were their age. Same braids, same uniforms, but hollow-eyed, starved, broken. Some of the prisoners watching had heard rumors before. Asterisk. The camps are just work colonies. Asterisk. But rumors shattered when the film cut to bulldozers, pushing bodies into trenches. When it ended, the screen went blank. No one moved. The generator sputtered to silence, leaving only the sound of rain tapping the canvas roof. For a full minute, the camp stayed frozen. Then a woman began to sob quietly at first, then harder. Another joined, and then another. It spread like a wave. No guard stopped them. No one dared. The morning after the film, the camp moved slower. The usual chatter was gone, replaced by a strange quiet that felt heavier than orders ever could. The women cleaned, worked, ate, but without speaking. Eyes stayed low, hands steady. Even the guards seemed to sense something had changed. No jokes, no shouting, just silence and duty. In the infirmary tent, a British corporal cut his hand while unloading medical crates. A German prisoner, once a Luftwaffe clerk, instinctively stepped forward. Asterisk. Let me, asterisk, she said softly. The corporal froze. Guard and prisoner, two enemies under one roof. But then he nodded. She tore a strip from a clean rag, wrapped his finger carefully, her hands trembling. When she tied the knot, she murmured, asterisk, you should wash it. Asterisk. He smiled faintly. Asterisk. You sound like my mum. Asterisk. She almost laughed, almost. Then she stepped back, unsure if she'd broken some invisible rule. That was how it started. Small gestures. A prisoner helping medics wash instruments. Another volunteering to sort supplies. The guards didn't forbid it. They let it happen. Soon, the infirmary had more hands than it needed. Within weeks, female prisoners were assisting in over 200 British-run recovery hospitals across occupied Europe. Some by choice, some by order, but many because they needed to do something good again. The trucks that came to take them away weren't painted gray like before. They were olive green, lined up in neat formation. The sky that morning was a dull silver, neither storm nor sunshine, just quiet light. Trucks stood in perfect rows outside the wire, engines idling low. A few British soldiers straightened their caps, their faces unreadable. It wasn't a victory parade. It wasn't even a farewell. It was a release, quiet, procedural, almost holy in its restraint. The German women stood in lines, clutching small bundles, a comb, a notebook, a ration tin, the handkerchiefs they'd been given weeks earlier. The major called the names slowly, one at a time. Each woman stepped forward, saluted out of reflex, then stopped halfway, remembering there was no flag left to salute. For every prisoner, a British guard handed over a paper packet brown, folded, tied with string. Inside, the items confiscated upon capture. Family photos, small crosses, wedding rings. Some cried. Others just stared, faces hollow but grateful. One woman opened her packet and found her mother's locket, still inside, polished clean. Asterisk. He even wiped the dirt off. Asterisk, she whispered. Private Lewis stood among the guards, his rifle slung low. The same woman he'd comforted weeks ago approached him in line. She looked thinner, older, but her gaze was steady. Asterisk. Thank you, asterisk, she said in halting English. He nodded once, trying not to smile. Regulations said no contact, no sentiment. But when she climbed into the truck, she looked back, and he raised two fingers in a silent salute. No cheers, no applause, just engines starting, boots shifting, the heavy rhythm of tires rolling over gravel. The convoy moved out slowly, disappearing into the gray morning. At the gate, the major stood still, until the last truck vanished. Then he turned to his men. Asterisk. All right, lads. Asterisk, he said quietly. Asterisk. Clean the yard. Asterisk. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The trucks had already started rolling when the order came down the line. Asterisk. Hold them a moment. Asterisk. Engines coughed to a stop. Confused faces peered from the truck beds, women gripping their satchels, half afraid something had changed. Then a British corporal walked forward, a crate in his arms, its sides marked with a red cross and faint stenciled letters. Asterisk rations, personal issue. Asterisk 1 by 1. The soldiers handed out small tins, each neatly wrapped in brown paper. Inside, biscuits, a tea sachet, a bar of soap, and a folded note stamped with the camp seal. It wasn't standard procedure. It was something decided quietly by the guards themselves. The message was simple. Asterisk. For the road. Asterisk. The women accepted them with trembling hands. No one spoke for a while. Some just stared at the tins like relics. For soldiers who'd once been ready to die for an empire that fed them lies, it was impossible to understand this mercy in a metal box. The tins weren't worth much, maybe 2 shillings each in military leftovers. A gesture at best. But in that moment, they meant everything. One woman turned to her friend, whispering, Asterisk. They send us home fed, not as enemies, but as people. Asterisk. Another nodded, clutching her tin like a medal she hadn't earned. Private Lewis stood near the last truck, watching the exchange. He'd scrawled a single word inside one of the lids before sealing it. Asterisk peace. Asterisk. He'd never know who got it. Maybe the woman with the gray eyes. Maybe someone else. But it didn't matter. The act was enough. Engines started again, gears grinding. The convoy lurched forward, wheels splashing through puddles. A few women waved from the back, hesitant, unsure if it was allowed. The guards didn't wave back, but several removed their caps as the trucks passed. Respect, not ceremony. The road stretched east toward ruins, ration cards, and the long rebuilding ahead. Behind them, the Union Jack fluttered weakly on the camp's pole, a symbol not of conquest, but of something quieter, restraint. As the last truck disappeared beyond the trees, the camp fell silent again. But one woman, her ration tin clutched to her chest, turned for a final look at the flag, the guards, the place where mercy had rewritten her understanding of war. And that memory would follow her home. Decades passed before anyone spoke of it. The war had ended, the world rebuilt, and those young women scattered, some to East Germany, some to the West, some across oceans. But the memory never faded. Not the hunger, not the fear, not the rifles that didn't fire. It lived in their diaries, in yellowed notebooks hidden behind family photos. In one such journal, found years later in Hamburg, a single line stood out in slanted script. Asterisk. They disarmed us with decency. Asterisk. That sentence said what none of them could have back then. That kindness had done what bullets never could. Historians pieced together their stories slowly. Letters surfaced, cross-checked with British camp reports. Interviews revealed a quiet pattern. German female prisoners who described their captivity not as torture, but as transformation. According to post-war surveys, 72% of Axis prisoners held by the Western Allies later described their treatment as fair or good. Many credited that experience with reshaping how they saw the world and themselves. One of the former guards, long retired, was asked in a 1970 BBC interview why he'd shown compassion. He paused, lit a cigarette, and said, Asterisk. Because someone had to stop the hate somewhere. Asterisk. Simple words, but they carried the weight of an entire generation exhausted by vengeance. For the women, the hardest part was returning home. Germany in 1945 wasn't a nation. It was rubble. Some were met with suspicion, branded collaborators or traitors. Others never spoke of their captivity at all. Yet, when asked years later what moment haunted them most, it wasn't the surrender, or the film, or even the hunger. It was the moment they realized they'd been treated better by their enemy than by their own commanders. One former flak helper wrote in 1959, asterisk, "We were not shot, we were seen." Asterisk. Those few words became a quiet echo across archives and documentaries, proof that sometimes the most devastating truth isn't cruelty, but unexpected mercy. In every war, someone decides when violence ends. For those women, it wasn't on the battlefield or the day Germany surrendered. It ended when a British major lowered his rifle and said, asterisk, "Feed them." Asterisk. And that single command, simple, human, unrecorded in any official order, became the kind of victory no statistic could ever measure.